Hello dear learners, this is Dr. Shaumili Mandal, an assistant professor of English at Vasant Kanya Mahavidyalaya Kamacha, and I am back with my 11th module, that is 11th week, preserving folklore, and what are the techniques and the opportunities we have. In this lecture, I'll be talking about how we have very important aspects of folklore that should be, you can say, carried forward. For example, the study of folkloristics and also how the study evolved, from the ancient, not the ancient actually, from how it was before and how it has been now. Also, I'll be talking about the famous people, who has taken this discipline very seriously, created the folk studies as a discipline, and also have kind of give their input, and their research actually helped folklore studies to be a discipline. So, firstly, I'll be introducing you to the 5 lectures which I'll be giving in this module. In this, I'll be giving you 5 lectures like my earlier modules, and in my lecture 1, I'll be talking about the evolution of folklore. In lecture 2, I'll be talking about the archiving. In lecture 3, I'll be talking about the folkloristics. In lecture 4, I'll be talking about the ethnography. And in lecture 5, I'll be talking about the barefoot historian. Now, I'll be starting with my first lecture, that is evolution of folklore. So, how did you can say folklore studies started? Okay, over the past 200 years, the folklore studies have gained a major momentum. Previously, we had folk tales, we had the various stories, we had the oral narratives, we had, and also they were kind of collected, they were kind of analyzed, they were kind of compiled by various folklorists we have, and they have given us the folklore studies. The emergence of nationalism in Europe throughout the 19th century sparked a desire to gather and conserve rural communities' customs. Peasants were taught by scholars to preserve a country's pure culture. For instance, in order to portray the Germanic spirit and identity, the brothers Grimm gathered fairy tales such as Cinderella and Hansel and Gretel in Germany. Also, Sharp gathered folk songs and dances in England because he thought they reflected a more innocent time before industrialization. Scholars compared myths, legends, and stories from various civilizations in an effort to identify commonalities, further formalizing folklore as an academic discipline. For instance, we have the Arne-Thompson classification system, which was done by Stitch Thompson and also Arne, and helped us to understand how folk tales are analyzed with various motives, with various common plots, with various common characters, and how the folk tales from all over the world have certain commonalities in them, and how we can apply the element of one folktale to another folktale of different region, and how they have, you can say, evolved maybe during the same time, and how can we find some, as I said, the common traits or some aspects and give us a new perspective of the folktale. The emphasis started to change from merely gathering text to examining the practical applications of folklore. Folklore's performance, social setting, and purpose took center stage. For instance, the performance theory was highlighted by American folklorist Richard Bauman, who studied how audiences perform and understand stories, jokes, or rituals in real time. By incorporating ideas from anthropology, sociology, literature, and media studies, folklore studies have broadened beyond rural or traditional cultures to encompass urban legends, digital folklore, and expressive culture in its many manifestations. For instance, we have narrative functions and social worries in contemporary civilizations, which are examined in stories such as The Killer in the Backseat. Social media challenges creepypasta like Slender Man and memes are now considered digital folklore. Researchers look at how societies like Native American storytelling in activism or Afro Caribbean religions in diaspora use folklore to preserve their identities. Power, marginalization, and identity are among topics that are examined in contemporary folklore studies. Important considerations include who gets to tell the stories, whose folklore is preserved, and how these tales illustrate cultural resistance and adaptation. For instance, studies of feminist folklore could look at how women's folk tales or practices, like mother-sung lullabies or retellings of Bluebird, reflect their social roles, resistance, or agency. Now, I come to the 19th century where the original and the early development of folk as culture. Remember, an important turning point in the scholarly knowledge of culture, belief systems, and oral traditions was the 19th century, when folklore studies first emerged. During this time, academics from all over Europe worked to protect the quickly disappearing customs of rural and illiterate populations as a result of modernization and industrialization. Here is a more thorough examination of these pioneers contributing along with some examples. For example, we have the very famous Grimm brothers, the Wilhelm Grimm and Jacob Grimm, who gave us stories like Hansel and Gretel, Rumpelstiltskin, and others, and showed us how folk tales formed a very important part of the lives of the people. They have also given us, various number of folk tales which showed the basic character traits of human beings. As we always know that the tales reflect the psychological mindset of normal human beings, and they broadened the study of folklore studies, also enabling others to take folklore studies as a discipline and carry it forward and apply it to other folk tales and form more folklore studies centers in the world. These stories, the Grimm brothers, which were collected from storytellers and peasants, frequently featured grim moralistic themes. Britain's Sir Edward Tyler is frequently credited with founding the field of cultural anthropology. He believed that cultural customs were remnants of past phases of human evolution and that folklore offered a glimpse into the primitive mentality. For instance, Tyler developed his idea of animism in his book Primitive Culture by examining myths, rituals, and practices from various societies. He claimed that the belief in spirits and the supernatural was the first religion practiced by humans. We have the British national Andrew Lang, who created a massive impact by releasing vibrant compilations of folk and fairy tales, including the Blue Fairy Book and other coloured fairy books. Lang is a Scottish scholar and helped to popularize these stories. For instance, Lang's writings included legends from Europe, Africa, and Asia, including the Three Bears and Aladdin. He attempted to track the development of folklore motifs since he thought they were universal. We also have William Thoms, who gave us the term folklore in 1846 in his journal The Athenaeum, and he is credited to be the first folklorist who gave us, as I said, folklore as a discipline, with also the establishment of the Folklore Studies Academy. Besides the Grimm brothers, William Thoms is also told to be the propounder of folklore studies. For instance, Thoms was drawn to the folklore, superstitions, ballads and proverbs of the rural populace, including nursery rhymes like Ringa Ringa Roses, seasonal celebrations like May Day, and beliefs about witches. He underlined how important it is to research these customs before urbanization destroys them. The foundation for the scholarly study of folklore was established by these early folklorists. Their techniques gathering, categorizing, and analyzing oral traditions served as the foundation for later fields such as comparative mythology, ethnography, and cultural anthropology. For instance, historians used the Arne-Thompson Author Index to track motifs seen in European tales by the Grimms across cultural boundaries. Now, I'll be talking about how the folk culture was institutionalized as a discipline from the late 19th century till the early 20th century. In my previous, I talked about the basics, then I said about the 19th century, and now I'll be talking about the 19th century till early 20th century. The creation of scholarly associations with the goal of methodically gathering, conserving, and researching traditional beliefs, customs, stories, and behaviors marked the beginning of the formalization of folklore as an academic field in the late 19th century. The American Folklore Society was founded in 1888 and the British Folklore Society was founded in 1878. And these societies actually signaled the change. Whenever we see any societies or academies are being built, it gives the discipline, more you can say importance, and also it gives an impetus to the people who are pursuing them. You can say they gather more confidence to pursue it further as they know that now they have a place where they can do their work better. The British Folklore Society, for instance, issued magazines like Folklore that featured examinations of British fairy tales, traditions like maypole dancing, and marriage and death rituals. A key contributor to the integration of folklore into the larger study of civilizations was Franz Boas, a pioneer in American anthropology. Cultural relativism, which holds that one should comprehend cultural practices within their own settings rather than through a Eurocentric lens, and the value of fieldwork were both stressed by Boas. As an illustration of how these stories were essential to the social and moral fabric of the communities, Boas gathered and published indigenous myths such as Kwakiutl's Raven Cycle during his work with the Inuit and the Native American cultures of the Pacific Northwest. His method confirmed folklore's value as a means of comprehending social systems and worldviews rather than only as amusement. When Stitt Thompson founded the first PhD program in folklore at Indiana University in 1949, folklore's academic standing was substantially enhanced. Thompson's contributions to the development of the motif index of folk literature, a classification scheme that arranges recurrent narrative components in folk tales from around the world, are also well known. Examples of standardized words for comparative folklore analysis include the test of character and the magical helper. This made it possible for academics to track how stories moved and changed throughout different cultures and eras. As a result, folklore evolved from a collection of comprehending rustic customs to an acknowledged field that is essential to comprehending cultural expression, identity, and transmission. Now, I am going to talk about the cultural nationalism which happened from the early to mid 20th century. A time when many nations, particularly those aiming for independence, amongst which India was the one, the cultural distinction or unification exploited traditional cultural manifestations to forge a sense of collective identity, which is always reflected in folk culture, which emerged as a result of cultural nationalism in the early to mid 20th century. In an effort to establish uniqueness, continuity, and validity, folk culture was purposefully gathered, revitalized, and promoted during this time as part of national initiatives. When a nation is defined by its common culture, legacy, language, and customs, rather than by political or racial factors, it is known as cultural nationalism. I've attached a photo of the great poet and the Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore, who was a symbol of cultural nationalism in the Indian context. He was the one who said, you can say, who defined how nationalism should function and how we can take folk culture in accordance and imbibe with the nationalistic fervor and encourage the mass for having greater nationalism for the country. He also said that you should preserve or bring back customs that are thought to be dying out as a result of colonization or modernization. Using common folk symbols, he created a cohesive national identity. And utilizing traditional culture as a political instrument to oppose foreign influence or imperialism. We have Tagore, right? We have Gandhi, we have Nehru, who were a part of our nationalism and who, you can say, urged the common masses to fight for the country, to boycott, we can say, the foreign influence and embrace the Indianness more so that we can actually get out of the colonialism and have an identity of our own. Romanticization of the peasant class is also a folk culture feature in cultural nationalism. Rural areas were frequently portrayed as the authentic representatives of the country. Only customs deemed authentic or beneficial to the development of the country were kept alive. Standardization and folk music, dances and tales were given official forms by governments and academics. Folk culture was utilized at state ceremonies, taught in schools and advertised in the media. I will come, to the instance of Ireland. I talked about India, now about the Ireland and how the Celtic revival in the 20th century helped Ireland gain back its nationalism. One of the very famous names who helped in the Celtic revival we have is W.B. Yeats, who, being a prominent author throughout the world, took Ireland, to the world view and explained the world that Ireland too has a very culturally rich folk culture. The Irish mythology and folklore served as an inspiration for Yeats, and thousands of oral histories and anecdotes were gathered by organizations such as the Irish Folklore Commission, which was established in 1935. Also, coming back to India, the village life, khadi and folk handicrafts were marketed by Mahatma Gandhi and others as anti-colonial symbols, as I said, and it stood as an independence and defiance of the British cultural hegemony. We also have the USSR, the present-day Russia, who, to uphold communist ideals and its satellite nations, gathered and modified folk customs. Folk ensembles and festivals portrayed an idealized image of the rural working class. Traditional dances and costumes were kept alive, but also choreographed and sanitized. For instance, the Red Folk Choirs, which were established by the USSR, combined traditional tunes with political lyrics. Also, national epics and identity in Finland and the Nordic countries throughout the early 20th century assembled from oral tradition in the 19th century and, as a manner, influenced national identity. Folk dance and costumes are used in schools and festivals to preserve cultural unity, particularly during independence movements. Numerous crafts, dances and oral histories were prevented from going extinct. Some folk traditions like Scotland's Highland Games were brought back to life or even made up to fit national ideology. The tension between political use and authenticity, according to critics, were also there. And the folk culture that was pushed at this time was frequently politicized and sanitized. Folk culture was a purposefully selected and politicized instrument of cultural nationalism from early to mid 20th century, rather than merely a spontaneous expression of people's lives. Folk traditions were praised as representations of persistent identity and struggle, whether in colonized countries vying for freedom or in European nations attempting to forge closer ties. Now, I'll be talking about the folk culture in the later 20th century. The folk culture's development in the second half of the 20th century was characterized by a dynamic interaction between invention, preservation, and international trade. During this time, folk elements were combined with modern forms, old activities were revived, and people became more conscious of their cultural identity and heritage. Traditional folk music experienced a rebirth in popularity in the United Kingdom around the middle of the 20th century. Folk songs, frequently with socialist overtones, were collected and performed by pioneers such as A. L. Lloyd and Ewan MacColl. We have the British folk rock, which also is a combination of the folk and the rock, and which ruled the British charts in the music industry during this time. We still have, the country songs, and also we have the elements of folk culture in most of the English songs in the present time. Still now we have it. And we also praise them, we listen to them, and we are inspired by them. The Mingai movement, which began in Japan in the 1920s and was spearheaded by individuals such as Yanagi Soetsu, highlighted the beauty of commonplace items made by unidentified craftspeople. Following World War II, this idea gained popularity when the Japanese government designated some crafts as national treasures. As a result of the subsequent Mingei boom in the 1960s and 1970s, demand for handcrafted folk crafts skyrocketed, demonstrating a widespread admiration for traditional craftsmanship. Folk rock originated in the United States in the middle of the 20th century, when rock and folk music elements were combined. Electric instruments were introduced into traditional folk music by musicians like Bob Dylan and bands like the Byrds, which increased the genre's popularity and audience. The Roots revival also began to take shape during this time, as musicians combined traditional sounds with modern sensibilities, drawing inspirations from their cultural past. The Nueva Canción movement, which combined political action with folk music, emerged in Latin America in the 1960s and 1970s. Traditional music was utilized by musicians such as Mercedes Sosa in Argentina and Violeta Parra in Chile to promote cultural identity and address social issues. Their contributions reverberated throughout the continent, impacting successive generations and fusing political awareness with folk music. The Folk Costume Festival, held in Bulgaria, honors the country's rich folk traditions, which includes dance, music, and handicrafts. And nowadays, we also have folk festivals where the countries, as I said, in Bulgaria, music, dance, cuisine, and everything is celebrated, giving folk culture an impetus. And in a way, we can say that folk traditions throughout the world is being alive in these mechanisms, in these steps we are taking, right? They are being more popular and people are gradually accepting them more, embracing them more, and we can say imbibing them more. Next, I come to the folk culture and the contemporary trends in the 21st century. Folk culture has seen a dramatic shift in the 21st century, marked by its adaptability, inclusion, and incorporation of contemporary technologies. Folk culture trends of today show a fusion of innovation and tradition as groups work to retain their traditions while interacting with digital and global influences. Collaborations with genres such as electronic, hip hop, and indie rock have shaped modern folk music. Through the use of synthesizers and electronic components, musicians like Anna Ferrer and Tata Relena have brought classic Spanish and Catalan folk music back to life, resulting in a combination that appeals to modern listeners. Similar to this, performers like Debit and Vocaik Russin bridge the gap between traditional and contemporary musical practices by fusing digital techniques with antiquated instruments. Folk customs are now widely shared and preserved thanks in large part to the internet. Traditional storytelling, music, and cooking techniques can be shared on websites like YouTube and podcast, opening up these cultural activities to a worldwide audience. You will see presently in YouTube we can see, and also in the Instagram we see nowadays, that people from various countries are bringing forward their culture, their cuisine and their lifestyles in the YouTube channels, and they are being viewed by the audience throughout the world. So now we can see, that the platforms we have like YouTube, we have Instagram, and we have Spotify, we have Wing, which is actually working, as a catalyst, and people from throughout the world are showcasing their cultures, which is comprising of food, their lifestyle, their performances, their dances, their song, and we from our homes, we are viewing them, we are getting knowledge about them. There are also many, food reviewers who kind of travels throughout the world, tasting the food and letting us know which food is best in which part. They are also, we can say vloggers we find who are traveling throughout the world and, and kind of giving us the knowledge of how other cultures are. And when we are going to travel all those places, we are already accustomed with the cultures, because though we have not experienced them live, but we at least have an idea because we are seeing them in the digital platforms, making us more knowledgeable and helping us, to be more acquainted with it. That is what we can say, digital media has done, and it has also helped folk culture in this way. Younger generations can interact with their cultural history in ways that suit modern lives thanks to digital archives and virtual museums, which also aid in the preservation of endangered customs. Gender inclusion is becoming more and more prevalent in modern folk culture. The first unisex folk costume, Sweden's Backadrakten, is a noteworthy example. It was created to promote wider involvement in Swedish folk customs by providing an ensemble that is not restricted to a particular gender or geographical area. This movement is a reflection of folk culture's march towards more varied and inclusive manifestations. Folk music, as I said, has evolved into a tool for identity inquiry and cultural reclamation. By tackling colonial and nationalist tropes and concentrating on universal themes, musicians like Angeline Morrison and collectives like Broadside Hacks are reimagining folk music in Britain. This movement engages with tradition while critically re-examining national identity, reflecting broader societal trends. Folk culture is still celebrated and preserved in large part through traditional art festivals. Folk music, dancing, storytelling, and traditional crafts are celebrated through seminars and performances at events like the Whitland Music Organization's Traditional Arts Weekend in Michigan. These kinds of events encourage community involvement and give adults and children the chance to learn and partake in traditional customs. Concerns regarding authenticity and commodification have arisen as a result of folk culture's prominence in international marketplaces. Sometimes traditional music, crafts and apparel are taken from their original culture, setting and repackaged for mass consumption. Commercialization can open up financial opportunities, but it also brings up moral dilemmas regarding representation and ownership, emphasizing the need to strike a balance between economic viability and cultural integrity. Traditional crafts are seen as a resurgence in popularity as communities look to rediscover their cultural roots. The rise in demand for handcrafted pottery, textiles, and other crafts is indicative of this renaissance, which is frequently made possible by internet marketplaces that let artists display and market their creations around the world. In conclusion, a dynamic interaction between tradition and innovation characterizes the evolution of folk culture in the 21st century. Folk culture keeps evolving to remain relevant and vibrant in the modern world through a variety of means, including fusion with current genres, digital involvement, gender inclusivity, cultural reclamation, community festivals, and the resurrection of traditional crafts. Now I come to the end of the first lecture of my 11th module. And here I have tried to give you the evolution of folklore from the early times till the 21st century and how we have redefined them, how we have repurposed them, and how we have reinterpreted them for the new society we have and for the contemporary trends. Thank you and see you in my other lectures.